I get so nervous every time we start.
I know, it's so funny. I'm always like, oh, I'm nervous.
I'm nervous. Hello, I'm Isabel.
And I'm Jessica.
And welcome back to
The Greatest Genre,
aka fantasy romance, aka romantasy, where we will be reading.
Here, we will be rereading, dissecting, and fully fangirling over the exhaustive works of the romantasy queen, Sarah J. Maas, starting with A Court of Thorns and Roses.
Today, we'll be focusing on ACOTAR chapters 26 through 31. So we have another chapter episode for you today. The first portion of that episode will be completely spoiler-free. We'll be speaking exclusively about the events that happened within those chapters and previous chapters and episodes, sharing thoughts, analyses, and also referencing those events. Second portion of today's episode, spoilers abound! Actually, it's going to be a separate episode.
Yes. We are aware of the fact that these episodes have been getting longer and longer, and we don't want to cut anything out, but we also recognize that having, episodes that are an hour and a half long
can be daunting.
It's a lot. So this is going to be, we are going to have episode 6, part 1, which will, just like the first portion of all the episodes before, be referencing everything that has happened from chapters 1 up to chapter 31.
Correct.
Then we will have episode 6, part 2, and that will be exclusively spoiler section. Everything is on the table, theories, everything.
So if you have not already read ACOTAR, Crescent City, and Tog, you will not want to be exposed to those, and you should decidedly not listen to that episode.
We will keep a disclaimer at the beginning of that episode as well, just in case you accidentally, if you don't want spoilers and you accidentally click on part 2, we will begin
by announcing
part 2 by
spoilers.
Reminding you that we will be spoiling lots of things. So,
additionally, some quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Please keep things kind in the comments.
Yes.
So far, we've been very lucky with this, getting good feedback. And also an adult content warning.
Yes, this podcast.
Oh my God.
And this episode,
in
like
particular,
the series itself, does from time to time contain adult content and adult language. So, if that is not your thing, then perhaps this is not the episode for you, but we hope that it is. Because it's going to be so fun.
Certainly the episode for us. Whew. Okay, and lastly, if you have not already, please subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel.
It would bring us so much joy.
It would. You can listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and also apparently Amazon Podcasts and Google Podcasts, although we don't know how to get there. We do highly recommend our YouTube channel because that way you get to see our faces. And if you have not yet noticed, as most of you probably hasn't, because I think that everyone listens and doesn't watch, but
probably most people. But even if you're not watching, guess what?
We are wearing official Greatest Genre merchandise.
It's official.
So if you would like one of these t-shirts, they will not have the Exiles logo on them. It'll just say The Greatest Genre, but you will be able to shortly purchase one on our Linktree.
Yes, we will have a link, and you can order your own Greatest Genre t-shirt if you would like to rep the podcast and spread the good word about The Greatest Genre, both the actual Greatest Genre and the show.
Precisely.
Yes.
And now, Jessica,
yes,
I think that it is time. Oh, and I didn't even say our Instagram handles and our Twitter handles. So you can follow us on Instagram at _greatest genre.
Yes.
On Twitter at greatest genre. On TikTok, the greatest genre.
The Greatest Genre. I looked it up.
And then you can email us at thegreatestgenre@gmail.com.
Please send us emails if you have questions, if you have thoughts, and most importantly, we are crowdsourcing fan cast ideas because we're holding out hope for the Hulu show. Mm-hmm. Hope is not dead yet. It's dwindling, but it's not dead. So please, if you have fan cast ideas, send them in. We're going to be doing something special with those towards the end of season 1.
Specifically for Lucian. We're struggling.
Yeah, we
still
really need Lucian.
And now, Jessica, I think it is time to return to Prythian. Let's go over the wall, return to Prythian, and venture into chapters 26 through 31 of A Court of Thorns and Roses. Ooh. You ready for those summaries?
I am, and today we're going to be doing a speed read of the summaries because we have simply too much to talk about for us to, recap in detail all the things that have happened. So, start the timer, proverbially. here we go. We begin.
Should we cheers
these
before you
chapters?
start?
Oh my
We
goodness,
haven't-
yes. Oh my
Okay.
God. I'm so sorry. I was just ready to dive right in there. These chapters begin with lunch.
Why was that so funny?
It's not what I have written down.
I think it's technically breakfast, but they're hungover,
it was the first
so it's
meal
lunch.
of the day, but it was lunchtime, and I believe the menu was lunch food. Anyways.
Of which we did not get descriptors. Anyway, continue.
It's
I'm
fine.
so sorry.
It's fine. Probably maybe for the best.
I won't make eye contact with you.
So we begin with a very unexpected and unpleasant visitor at lunch, who brings the happiness and the light and the whimsy that we've experienced in the last few chapters, just really brings it to an abrupt and screeching halt. The encounter leaves everyone really, really rattled to their core.
Reeling, if you will.
Yes. To the point where that night, Tamlin comes to Feyre's room and tells her that he is sending her home.
What else does he do, Jessica?
You know what? We're going to get to that later. But he tells her that he is setting her free and that she has to go home for her own safety. She begs him to let her stay, but he is resolute
in his
decision. And so they spend a night together in each other's arms before she drifts off to sleep, and she thinks that she hears him whisper that he loves her. And then she leaves the next day and is taken back to the mortal realm, where she realizes that her family's fortune has indeed, for lack of a better term, improved. Which is perhaps the most grotesque understatement I've ever made while giving these summaries. So she's back in the mortal realm. We're spending some more time with the Archeron family, which is interesting, rife with commentary that I'm very excited to get into.
Yes.
And among other things, Feyre learns that the glamour did not work on Nesta, so they have some pretty significant bonding time. Her father throws a ball in her honor, and during the ball, she hears that the Better family was attacked, and we'll talk about why that's significant in a little bit. After hearing about this attack, she realizes that she has to return to Prythian. So she leaves pretty immediately and travels through the forest, finds a way through the wall, finally arrives back to the manor, only to realize that she is too late.
Dun dun dun! That was good. That was
my
brief.
Fastest one yet.
I know. I kind of miss the old ones.
We'll get back to the dramatic summaries later, but I
there
just
is
felt
simply
like
too
today there was so much for us to talk about that it was important that we just get right to the discussion of it.
So lunch. Many things happen at lunch.
Okay, but first, before the important things that happen at lunch,
let's discuss the banter.
Let's discuss the banter and how hungover Lucian is.
When he's like, well, you two were, doing whatever it was you were doing. I was on border patrol. And then Tamlin gives him this size look.
Alone?
Were you? And he was with some company.
Yeah.
After a pointed cough from Tamlin. Lucian fucked. He dallied.
Maybe more than one person.
And I don't think we can discuss this any further.
I don't think we can either, because it's simply too much. But it was so funny. So I giggled so hard reading this scene over again
so
because
great.
Feyre and Tamlin are just the most obnoxious couple to be around.
They would be so...
With the exception of maybe another couple we'll talk about later
on. So annoying. And at one point, Lucian, I totally
sympathize.
I'm trying to eat. Well, you know what is so funny?
Because he can smell both of their
desire,
arousal, and I'm sure it would be really not cool to sit there and just be like, you guys.
I have that exact note in my... Although, is that a spoiler? No, it's not a spoiler. It's so funny rereading this scene, knowing about the Fae's heightened senses, and how Feyre is sitting there thinking... I just wanted him to take me on the table right now.
She was having some very unfiltered thoughts.
Yes.
X-rated thoughts about broad hands. Did you catch that? Because I read it and I think of you.
I literally cannot read the word broad without bursting into a fit of giggles.
She's like, I wanted his broad hands all over my body. And I was like, oh no.
And poor Lucian is sitting there having to smell that desire.
Basically, like, know exactly what she's thinking about the entire time. And then also Tamlin is, like, not doing a very good job of playing. Neither of them are playing it cool.
No.
At all.
Decidedly not.
and poor Lucian is just trying to nurse his hangover.
Yes. Now, all of this banter and levity is brought to an abrupt halt when Lucian has to give some news to Tamlin and Feyre.
Which seemed like an interesting time and a place for him to deliver the news, and even Feyre kind of acknowledges that. And she wonders also if emissary also means, like, spy master.
Potentially. We don't know the full scope of Lucian's role yet in the Spring Court.
But we do know that he's very good at his job.
Very good at both politics and banter.
And it's very hot.
Very hot. But he tells Feyre and Tamlin that 20 younglings were killed by the Blight from the Winter Court. Apparently, the Blight burned through their magic and broke apart their minds. So this is the first mention of an additional court. We've heard about night, spring, autumn.
Summer.
And now we have winter. And this is so much more tragic because we know how rare it is for the High Fae
how precious the younglings are. And even that aside, in the real world, when you hear about loss of
children, especially
loss of children as a result of any kind of war, is like
just truly heartbreaking.
It's the most devastating thing, and I think it's effective in that it makes us realize, while we have been in the Spring Court enjoying all of this magic and happiness,
it is a bubble elsewhere.
And there is dark, devastating
things happening throughout Prythian.
All around it. Kind of, it's sort of a reality check. Like, it's that cold splash of water.
An additional splash of water. Tamlin suddenly tells Lucian to get Feyre to the window.
This whole sequence she's so good at writing this.
I know.
It's so, my hair stood up on the back of my neck. I was like, I had goosebumps. I was like, oh my God, what's happening?
And who saunters into the room? So Feyre is completely glamoured next to the window.
So Tamlin shoots up, snarls, which is a problem, and then and Lucian yanks her over to the side of the room, shoves her between him and the wall so that his scent covers her.
Hers.
And additionally, she has a glamour. She smells the magic and realizes that she's been glamoured. She has no idea who is about to show up, but she knows that whoever
she knows.
it is
I
very
think
scary.
one of the thing that jumped out to me the most rereading this scene was how we have never seen Tamlin truly afraid or Lucian truly afraid. And
lots of anger, like lots of frustration from them, but never like fear. I agree.
And this was such a powerful scene to reread because of the complete helplessness that both of them have in that moment. So what happens is, who walks in but the stranger that saved her from the Picts on Calumny? A number of things are revealed in this scene. First of all, this dangerous stranger that she met at Calumny, we find out his name is Rhysand, Reese, Rise, whatever the fuck you call him. And we should just get this straightened out right now because
the correct pronunciation is Rhysand.
I find that to be very difficult.
My audiobook says Rhysand.
No.
Which is just not my favorite.
I always read it as
Rhysand. Is Reese.
I understand that abbreviated it's Reese. The long version of his name, I want to say Rhysand.
I get it.
So I would just like to say right now, if I deviate to that, it's involuntary. It's just...
It's hard to unlearn. When you've been reading a book character's name in your head a certain way, and then you hear it pronounced a different way, and you realize that yours is wrong. That's a tough transition.
Throwback to the moment we weren't sure there was buggy or bog.
Well, the first time I ever really experienced it was with Hermione. I mean, good Lord.
What did you think
I was like 6 or 7 years old reading these books, and there were so many vowels all in the same vicinity, and I was like, I got nothing.
So you were it like, turned out to be tummy own.
No, it was just one of those things where you were like, where you're reading it and you're like, and then you like keep going, you're like, that girl.
So his name is revealed to be Rhysand.
And he is...
Also, other things are revealed, such as he is Amarantha's whore. So we suddenly have a name for this mysterious she that we have been hearing about for the last 25 chapters.
Yes. When he makes his entrance into the lunchroom. I suppose it's the dining room.
Yes.
But, So he's described as having very feline. His movements are very feline, very
Deadly.
graceful. Fine, rich clothing, again, cloaked in tendrils of night. He is a presence.
Yes.
To say
a presence
the least.
that both Tamlin and Lucien are clearly terrified of.
They're absolutely, sort of sat back on their heels, for sure. But Lucien doesn't seem to be that afraid because he is pretty quick to hurl insults at this terrifying new stranger.
Who just as quickly hurls some stuff back.
It's that autumn court
fire.
blood.
Yeah. Oh. There are a couple of things that I highlighted from this scene. First of all, power dynamics. There's a definite switch. This is the first time we see Tamlin not acting like maybe a High Lord would when someone comes into his court.
He's
this kind of
holding back, and he's being he's trying to be very careful.
It is revealed that Tamlin and Rhysand had some sort of relationship in their youth. This is clearly soured. And it is revealed that Rhysand is High Lord of the Night Court.
Because he says, "Didn't you get my present?"
Yes. And he is going to go back and tell Amarantha that Tamlin has reconsidered her offer, whatever that may be. So there's clearly, again, something very big happening here that Feyre is not clued into.
And from the context clues, it seems as though he is on an errand from Amarantha. He's sort of there almost on her behalf, it seems, because he is supposed to be reporting back to her about the status of things in the Spring Court. And it is confusing to try and piece things together. Because
even rereading this, I was like, what is he actually doing here? Is he just checking up on, it's unclear.
It's very unclear because on the one hand, he's like, ugh, I've been bored, Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, he'll say things like, oh, Amarantha's going to be so interested to hear about this, that, and the other. And then he also just seems like he has nothing better to do with his time than to come around here and be an asshole.
It is also revealed that so wherever he is going back to is where Lucien's mother is. There's this very charged moment where...
I picked up he makes several threats against Lucien's mother, which I did not appreciate one bit.
What is it when Lucien says... I forget exactly what the line is.
He just very quickly started throwing Lucien's mother around in a very
saying, I'll know how to make her bleed.
Disrespectful at best and predatorial at worst.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
he's like a terror. It's like he's making an unveiled threat.
Yeah.
And this is really fucking scary to be on the other end of.
Yes.
And as he's about to leave and they can all kind of release the breath they've been holding in, he sees that the table is set for 3.
Well, and he walks around behind Feyre's chair, and even Feyre's like, shit, he's going to smell me.
Yes, and he does. And there's this brief flicker of disbelief that passes over his face, and then he goes, where's your guest? He notices Feyre behind Lucien.
Well, and he gets pissed.
And he gets very angry.
He says, you dare to glamour me? This is before or after he gets up in Lucien's face and says, I was slaughtering on battlefields before you were born.
This is after.
Because he and Lucien really go back, and Tamlin doesn't say much.
No.
Really.
Tamlin is just sitting there trying to, I think, hold it together.
Which is interesting, and it's just now occurring to me as we're having this discussion. In previous chapters, Lucien has been the one being like, we should be doing something. We should be fighting back. We should be trying. Mm-hmm. And he really gets on Tamlin for this kind of passive...
approach that he's taken.
And I think that this is another instance where Lucien is probably in his head feeling like, okay, well, if Tamlin's not going to stand up to this bully, then I will.
And he's almost swatted away like a fly.
I know.
So the power dynamics
here.
She
says Rhys brushed Lucien aside like a curtain.
Something like that, yeah. And she
How
says
scary
that
to be
it's so scary
standing there.
And she also describes, I think, the smirk on his face, like his smile wetted itself to an edge, and he was more deadly than I had ever seen Tamlin look. She says something like that.
She also says she would never paint him.
Yes, because she's too scared.
Yes.
Tamlin isn't moving. He isn't trying to stop Rhysand from approaching Feyre and entering her mind, which I thought was interesting. He does nothing. He sits there. I think he is overcome with fear.
I think he truly believes that if he tries to step in, it will get worse.
Yes.
Which I understand.
I understand, because clearly they know something about Rhysand that we don't.
Well, and she's picking up that
he is more powerful than these two.
But it's also like, if he is there as Amarantha's emissary, basically, then to strike against him is to strike against her. And to bring her entire wrath upon the Spring Court is something that clearly needs to be avoided at all costs. So I think in Tamlin's mind, he feels like he cannot do anything. And Rhysand kind of says as much. He basically is like,
you're gonna...
Like, now, you be nice to me.
He's almost playing with them like a cat in his food.
But he is.
Yeah.
He is. He's totally playing with them. He's coming in here. He's trying to make them scared. He's swinging his dick around. Mm-hmm. And I found him to be really very unlikable for the entire exchange. He's the kind of villain where when you watch them on screen, like, you know how like really good villains just make you angry? They make you want to be able to just
want to throw something across a wall,
right?
Yes, exactly.
And that is how I felt reading this scene,
because it was almost like that you held no power.
You can do nothing, and that's what makes you so angry,
evil.
Because they're so nasty and smug. He's very smug.
Oh, he is
the entire time.
As soon as he notices Feyre, he abruptly...
He's no longer playing around.
No, he is angry. And he says, "You dare glamour me." And he walks over to her. And a new part of what his powers are revealed as he proceeds after Tamlin says, "You have seconds to get out." And he says, "If I were you, I wouldn't speak to me like that." And then he breaks into Feyre's mind.
Yeah, she's physically paralyzed.
This was so scary to read. The complete feeling of helplessness that she experiences. Here I have the quote pulled up. "Against my volition, my body straightened, every muscle going taut, my bones straining. Magic, but deeper than that. Power that seized everything inside me and took control. Even my blood flowed where he willed it. I couldn't move. An invisible talon-tipped hand scraped against my mind. And I knew, one push, one swipe of those mental claws, and who I was would cease to exist." How scary is that?
No, it's very scary.
And then he says something like... And then he starts revealing her innermost thoughts. And
this is not very nice.
No.
And wholly unnecessary, I might add. She's already scared.
I have notes
to humiliate her.
I have notes about this for the spoiler
addition,
section, as to why I think this happened, but we'll save that for later.
I'm really excited to get into that a little bit more. But then he says something else to the effect of, like, "I'd forgotten how easy it is to shatter human minds."
He says, "I'd forgotten that human minds...
He likens them to eggshells.
Are easy to shatter as eggshells."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then he runs a finger across the base of her throat. He is, like... He's trying to be as terrifying as possible in this moment.
Yes.
And then he reveals all the thoughts that she's been having about Tamlin.
And, like, once again, poor Lucian.
I know.
This is just really, I mean, humiliating for Feyre, but, like, very awkward for Lucian as well.
And Tamlin is sitting there saying, "Let her go," but he is not doing anything. He is sitting there, and you can see the anger on his face. SJM does a great job of describing, like, he's, like, shaking with anger. It's almost like he's holding himself back, but he is not moving. And then he makes Tamlin and Lucian get on the floor and beg.
This was crazy. And I do want to back up a little bit, because there's one other thing that Rhysand looks at Tamlin and says, "Oh, she doesn't know, does she?"
Again,
like, what does this
indication to something that is going on that Feyre is still not clued into.
We've always known that there is a lot going on that Feyre has not been told, that she doesn't understand. But now we start to think maybe all of this stuff that's going on actually has more to do with Feyre than Lucian and Tamlin have allowed her to believe.
Mm-hmm. And because then Rhys says, "If it's any consolation, she would have been the one for you.
Yeah.
And you might have gotten away with it. A bit late, though. She's more stubborn than you are.
Yeah.
And then he goes, Amarantha will enjoy breaking her. Almost as much as she'll enjoy watching you as she shatters her bit by bit. So Rhys knows that these two are in love with each other, even though that hasn't been said out loud yet. And
well, he definitely knows that Feyre's having a lot of dirty thoughts about Tamlin, for sure. And I think what we pick up on, the most important thing we pick up on here, is that Feyre is a part of everything that has been going on, which is very different than what Tamlin has told her. Mm-hmm. He has made her believe that it does not involve her.
She has nothing to do with it.
She has nothing to do with it. It's separate from her. That
it is his burden to bear.
It's his burden. There's nothing that she can do, and like she needs to just. He's going to keep her safe, but that she is not a part of it. And now, after this interaction, it's pretty clear to us as readers that that is not the truth.
Not the case. He makes Tamlin beg to
He makes them get on the floor and put their faces on the floor.
And Feyre says something like, I could have wept with rage at seeing the sight of my high lord.
And because it does. Yes, it makes you so angry that you're like sick.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And then he saunters out.
And he says, maybe.
Perhaps I'll tell her, perhaps I won't.
won't.
But while this entire exchange is going on, he tells Feyre to tell him his name.
Yes. He says, what's your name, love? And somehow
she pulls Claire
which is
Bedell
interesting
out of
because
her
if
hat.
he can get into her mind with one stroke of his power, he's got to ask her for her name.
Again, I have some notes about
I know
this.
you do. I know you do. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. But I think it's interesting to note.
Yes. No, 100%.
So he simply asks. He doesn't reach into her mind and take it from her. He asks her name.
And she acknowledges that. She's like, he can just steal it. If I hesitate for too long, he'll just steal it.
And
so
she's trying to wipe her own name. Mm-hmm. She's trying to not think about anything. So she just says the name Claire Bedell, which is significant.
Yes. And then he says, maybe I'll tell her, maybe I won't. And he leaves them reeling.
Feyre is like, does she vomit after he leaves?
I believe she does empty her stomach onto the floor.
Yes. There's a lot of thinking that she might empty her stomach onto the floor, but I can't remember if it actually happens after he leaves. She's probably a little hungover
Immediately
too.
goes.
She runs up. She runs up to her room. Tamlin has a magical meltdown,
which I also have some notes about.
I have some notes about it too, but I also am not. I'm self-aware enough to say that if I had been in his shoes, I probably also would have felt the need to because he couldn't.
Yeah.
When Rhys was standing there, and to feel that helpless and patronized.
Like sometimes you just gotta throw shit.
And we know that Tamlin is someone who it's really important to him to defend people who cannot defend themselves.
Yes, 100%.
That is something that is really, really core to who he is. And the fact that he was just held in that position where he could do nothing in his own home. I think I would have to rage afterwards too.
So she recovers in her room. Tamlin gives her molten chocolate. Tamlin has his magical meltdown.
Tamlin recovers by destroying the dining room. We can only
and Feyre can hear it downstairs. She can hear him going
roaring,
off.
the crashing, the shattering.
It's a bad situation.
It is very bad all around. Not sure where Lucien is, but.
So Tamlin comes
This is bad. There have been unsettled, the Naga were no fun.
This is the worst thing that has happened so far.
This is different.
A shift has taken place.
Yes.
Lucien and Tamlin have been terrified into an inch of their life.
Yes.
So as is Feyre.
Yes.
So eventually Tamlin comes up. He sits on the side of her bed and he tells her that he is going to send her away. And this breaks her.
It made me think of Beauty and the Beast when she finds out her dad is sick, and he just immediately is like, I set you free. You're free.
And he says that he'll take on the life debt that she owes, and if anyone ever comes, don't worry about it, basically.
Yeah. He basically says, I will pay the life debt if someone comes asking. Mm-hmm. And she, which is noble. That's a noble thing, and I think he is letting her go. Truly, I think he is just so terrified.
And he loves her so much. He's like, and listen, this is what you do. If you love someone, sometimes you let them go.
Well, and he even says to her, he's like, today, I couldn't protect you today.
And she doesn't understand. She's like, who is this? What is happening?
And he won't tell her anything.
He still will not tell her anything. He says, I can't tell you who these people are that they will hurt you. And
they will hurt you.
Why?
They will hurt you because of what you mean to me. Because of who you are to me.
Exactly.
And this kind of softens her a little bit because she's starting to realize what he feels for her. I actually thought the night they spend together is really beautiful.
I agree. I agree.
But and I think, I don't even know if this is a trope, but the whole like, oh, this might be the last night we ever spend together.
It's a mini trope.
It's a great. It's a mini
micro trope.
A micro trope that I love.
Yeah. A lot of last night we'll be alive, last night we'll be together, anything like that. I'm like, all right, let's get to it.
Mm-hmm. You just
and boy do they.
Yes. No, they. And he tries to leave. He says, "You won't get any sleep if I stay." And she
goes, "I'll keep my hands to myself."
And then she goes, "A lie, an outright lie."
But that was after they had done it for the first time. He tries to get up and leave, and she's like, "Don't do that." Yeah. Which I was like, "Why are you leaving?" I know
he wants her to leave.
That's ridiculous.
He doesn't actually leave. I think he just wanted her to ask him to stay.
Yes,
which is fine.
I just need to note very quickly. So as I was rereading. Our first sex scene! Hey! Finally.
Chapter 27.
At one point, as they're getting to it,
yes,
I keep forgetting that he's wearing a mask. And at one point, she's like tracing it with her hands. I'm like, Jesus, I keep forgetting that is on his face.
It's the claw coming out of his finger for me. To
tear away her underthings. Her lace underthings.
That was a little tough for me to read. I was like, ooh.
But there is a couple of words, a couple pieces that I pulled out here.
Oh?
That just I thought that you might enjoy.
Oh.
A ravenous, unyielding sort of hunger passed over his face.
Oh, I did like that.
Predatory intent.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I have one.
Freed of its tether.
Yes.
Again, what is it about? I know I actually am getting a little warm too. What is it about men acting like primal beasts?
Because we are primal at the core of our DNA. That's why.
It doesn't get more primal than this.
Oh my God, no.
Two people getting it on.
Mm-hmm. I had another one, and she said it's before they really cross the line, and he's like, if I
can't look at you
why
I'm talking about this, I'm sorry.
He's like, if I don't stop now, I won't be able to stop at all.
Yes.
And he kind of like pulls back and he's looking at her, and the quote is, "The full force of that wild, unrelenting High Lord's power focused solely on me."
Yep.
And I felt the storm contained beneath his skin, so capable of sweeping away everything I was, even in his lessened state. But I could trust him, trust myself to weather that mighty power. I could throw all that I was at him, and he wouldn't balk. And then
Which also made me think about, well, Isaac Hale definitely couldn't handle her.
No.
I think that Farah is...
A lady in the streets, shall we
say? And a freak in the sheets. I think so.
And so she's like, they're having this moment, and then she just says, "Give me everything."
Yeah. And I think she does something kind of naughty.
I don't want to talk about it. That's too much.
Okay. One other note that I had, and I mean, this is, I feel like a little micro, not a trope, but this happens in this genre in general, when the man climaxes. Or the male. They always roar. And I have one note. It says, hot. Can you put the AC down 1 degree, please? Just put it down 1. There we go. Thank you.
Great. It's a little warm in here all of a sudden. I'm like, woo.
So after they have, they bang, and it's all very amazing, and
it's transformative.
It's transformative. And she tells him to stay, and she's drifting off to sleep, and then she thinks that she hears him say, as his also a man stroking your hair.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about that.
There is literally no better feeling.
And that's intimacy.
Yes. It's almost hotter than the actual sex.
That all sounds really great. But the being held and having and having your hair, feeling like you can drift off to sleep
is the best feeling. And he says, "I love you, thorns and all." And then he kisses her brow, which is the most intimate sort of kiss that exists.
It's not fair.
It shouldn't be allowed.
You are sending her away and you're going to do that. Why do they do this?
I know. So they have this amazing night, and then the next morning she is abruptly put into a ridiculous carriage with a ridiculous dress.
Whole outfit sounds horrible, and Lucien says as much.
So we need to talk about the tension between Tamlin and Lucien as she is leaving. So
and between Lucien and Feyre. Lucien looks at her and he says, I thought you were smarter than this. Which I missed the first time. Completely.
Lucien is the most interesting character in this book. So much of who he is happens off page.
Yes. And so much that we don't understand until, like, you know, the end of this book and even the next couple.
I still don't think after 5 books we have the full scope of who he is as a person and his entire character.
I agree.
I agree.
We're going to have to get a handle on that.
So there's clearly a ton of tension between Tamlin and Lucien. Lucien does not think she should leave.
No.
And Tamlin actually out loud. Also, Lucien storms off.
Lucien does storm off. Not one for goodbyes. Lucien, Alice, and Feyre. None of them really say a farewell to each other.
It's all very abrupt. I mean, I think
tensions
everyone
are very high.
Still reeling from the night before.
And I think the only person who is really set in this decision is Tamlin. Mm-hmm. Feyre doesn't want to go. Lucien is clearly not in favor of this. Alice seems to be kind of off. Mm-hmm. And she just says to Feyre, Feyre's like, I really hope you get to see your nephews. And Alice,
which I loved that.
And
moment
the only thing,
the two of them.
Alice doesn't even say thank you. She just says, make the most of your freedom.
Oh, I missed that, even on a reread. Tamlin tells her out loud.
He says it again.
He says,
because she's standing there, and in her head, she's like, all I wanted to know was if he really meant that. I just wanted to hear him say it again. And the final thing, as the carriage is like pulling away, like the driver cracks the whip, the horses start to move, and it's the last thing he says before she's like
and
on
she
her way
finds
home.
herself
and
unable.
She cannot say it back.
She finds herself unable to say it back.
And her reasons were, like, in her head, they were interesting to me. It almost goes back to the version of herself that she was at the beginning of this story, where she doesn't allow herself to feel
good things
because nothing is certain, and because you cannot allow room for that in your head or your heart if you're going to survive. It's almost like she's reverting back
to her coping mechanisms that she had
was before, and it's actually very poetic because she is physically going back to where she was at the beginning of her journey. Not exactly, but...
And once again, she is knocked out.
Which again, and her irritation, she's like, really? We're still doing this?
Like, she was like...
The jig is up. I know where you live. Like, you don't have to knock me out.
And then she arrives at her family's mansion.
I mean...
estate, if you will.
This sounds opulent.
Gaudy?
Almost gaudy. But then again, she says it's almost exactly like Tamlin's manor.
Yes.
Which we also said was...
a bit gaudy, if you ask me. So she arrives, and Elaine...
in this huge gilded carriage.
Oh, God.
With 6 horses. Do you know how extra that is?
Do you know how extra her dress sounds?
Sounds terrible.
Also, like, she has presented herself as a very practical person who doesn't really enjoy wearing gowns and frilly dresses. And I think, why was she put in this, going back to the human land?
Because she has to look like the rest of them.
Has to look like she's been
at Aunt Ripley's house. So we might as well just get Aunt Ripley
out of the way.
Aunt Ripley.
Spelt R-I-P-L-E-I-G-H. Every time I read this
not to be confused with Ripley's Believe It or Not.
But she arrives at the manor, and
her sisters don't
even recognize her.
Which, to be fair, Feyre can barely... There's a moment later on in these chapters where she says, like, she can barely recognize herself when she passes a mirror. So, and they weren't
She was on the brink of starvation, and she
looks very... Yes. And her sisters are not expecting to see her because she's at
Aunt Ripley's
house. So they just think that some random lady is, like, showing up at their house. Then they figure out that it's Feyre.
So let's talk about the difference in greetings.
Wait. Okay, fine.
But what were you about to say?
No, I just have to... So they're like, oh my God, Feyre. and then Elaine's like, didn't you get our letters? And Feyre's like, I can't read.
And Elaine's like, what?
And I know that I've ripped on Elaine in the past, and it's not that I, like, seek opportunities to do so.
It's this that she gives them to us on a platter.
Easy.
I mean...
Didn't you get our letters? Girl.
Tough look for Elaine.
Your sister is illiterate.
And
now, on the flip side,
Nesta, her greeting is less warm.
Pretty much nothing.
I have this one line pulled out for Nesta, and I think you have the same note probably. I forgot how cunning her eyes were, how cold. She'd been made differently, from something harder and stronger than bone and blood. She was as different from the humans around us as I had become.
Yeah, I do have that quote. I have it down in the part 2.
Oh, part 2. Okay.
Section.
So basically, they're rich as fuck now. And
yeah, no, and this is all a little bit funny because it's also has a little like, cheesy.
It's like, oh, suddenly everything's happy and great. And
also, my audiobook
oh no,
narrator has the funniest Elaine voice ever. I wish I could just like play it.
Oh my god,
because her voice like shoots up 6 octaves, and it almost sounds like she's mocking Elaine all the time, which I find to be very fitting. She's like, "Oh, Feyre, you won't believe what happened. A week after you left, a stranger showed up at the door and asked Father to invest his money and gave us a chest full of gold." And, it's like, and she just sounds like an insufferable bimbo. And yeah, it's so tough. Hard.
Who just really likes to plant flowers.
And is so fucking clueless.
But we need to be... It's now, tough.
I'm just saying, the reintroduction to the Archeron sisters is pretty much exactly what it
as
was.
we left them.
Yes.
Nesta just still being a bitch.
Even in a totally different environment, their circumstances have totally changed, right? Mm-hmm. But this is just proof that, like, this is really just kind of who they are, regardless of their circumstances.
Yes, Elaine is described as having this, but she's described as having this lovely warmth, and she's really inviting, and all the servants love her.
Yes,
and she's kind to everyone, and Nesta is just imperious and cold, but very calculating.
She is, and I want to get into this a little bit more. So Feyre, like, there's this initial reintroduction, right? And it's Elaine is at least very, very happy to see her, which is nice. And their father, seems to be very happy to see Feyre. Nesta, I guess she's just being Nesta, but they're also she seems very suspicious of Feyre, which is interesting.
And we find out a little bit more about why in the next chapter.
But she's definitely, Feyre thinks to herself, like she's thinking to herself, I guess Nesta didn't care if I was around anymore because she doesn't need me. And of course we know now that that's not why Nesta is behaving this way. But it is a very interesting sort of reintroduction. But as Feyre spends the next couple of days, weeks?
I believe it's weeks.
In the mortal realm.
It might even be a month or so.
There's a lot of really interesting moments between Feyre and both of her sisters. Mm-hmm. And I guess let's start with Elaine, because yes, we rip on Elaine a lot because she seems to be a little clueless and shallow and maybe not very smart. But you're right. But she has a goodness about her. Feyre speaks about how warm she is and how kind she is to everyone.
I think that's the main thing and how that we have to cling on to as we read about her character.
That she is very kind.
Just a good person
and I loved the moment where Feyre walks back to their old hut and she looks at the house and she's like, and she was thinking about, so Elaine tells Feyre, Elaine actually gives a lot of really important information to Feyre, and it feels natural because obviously Feyre
they would
needs
be catching
to know,
up regardless about what's been going on the last few months.
And Elaine actually does show a little bit of depth and perception and awareness because she says, Nesta won't say this to you, but it was a little bit of a strange season because people just acted like we had just been away for sick. 8 years. Like we had just been sick.
And then apparently Nesta stopped going to the event.
Nesta had stopped going. It was like she couldn't stomach anymore. But the thing I thought that was interesting that Elaine said, and Feyre focuses on this when she goes back to see their old cottage. Elaine says, it made me miss sometimes those days
when we were
in the cottage when we were just all together. This house is so empty sometimes. It's so large. And so when Feyre goes back to the cottage and looks at it, and she's having, a lot of reflection, and she says, I looked at the house and I saw a prison. And Elaine looked at the house and saw shelter. And she saw shelter. And I realized which one of us had been stronger. And I do think that is a really beautiful, because you know what? It actually, in this moment, I'm realizing it makes me think of the strength of hobbits that Tolkien talks about in Lord of the Rings. how they have so much love for home and comfort, and often people write that off as softness. But that kind of love and loyalty and that kind of value for home can sow great strength in a person. And so I do think it's important that we remember
that as we
remember that
Elaine, because she gets really excited about throwing a ball for Feyre when she
Elaine
comes
is
back.
Still Elaine. Don't
Loves
get me wrong.
The pretty dresses and
it's
flowers.
fine to be girly.
Of course, it's
totally
fine to be girly. But
for me, it's just like you
wrote
your sister letters when you know she can't read.
She's also like not picking up on maybe there's more going on with Feyre than she is.
She's like, let's go to the continent next year.
And
let's go on a trip.
And Feyre has just had this life-altering experience, which of course they don't know
Elaine
what it is fully.
But Elaine is
she doesn't
soothing
observe
for her
things.
to be around because she's not going to put Feyre on the spot. She's just going to chatter away. And again, I think it is worth noting that Elaine's happiness, I think, is a little bit contagious. I think it does, and even the way that it's described, that like all of the servants cannot help but
just be in love with her,
offer her things, and her goodness and kindness and happiness seem to just sort of seep into everyone who is around her, which is significant, and it's a very interesting contrast to Nesta.
Dude, it's so funny because I always feel guilty being friends with people like that because they're so nice. I get this sometimes. Shout out with Nicole if you're listening. Like people who are so kind and like good to their core.
Shanna too.
And Shanna.
I
love
Shanna. She is so kind.
And I'm like, why are you friends with me? Like because no one's ever, listen, I'm a nice person, but no one's gonna
I think
ever.
You're very nice.
Of course. Well, thank you. No one's ever gonna be talking about me behind my back and be like, oh my God, Izzy, she's so sweet. It's not going to happen.
I don't think anyone's ever said that about me either.
That's why we get along so great. But it's hard. People like that are contagious, and you just want to soak up their sunshine.
They lift up the people around them.
They really, really do.
And
that's what I think we just
that is a good thing. That is a rare thing.
Especially, and thank God she has that, because that is not what she is getting from Nesta.
No, it's not. So let's get into Nesta. Nesta, like I said before, seems very suspicious of Feyre.
Right from the get-go. Doesn't
really
give her a hug,
avoids
nothing.
her, doesn't seem to have interest in talking to her about much of anything, and just is, like, even before, like, she was nasty and cruel before, but they were engaging with each other. Now it almost seems like she wants nothing to do with Feyre. She could not care less that Feyre is back, has nothing to say to her, after months of Feyre being away, right? So it's all very strange until
Elaine reveals that Nesta stopped going to socialite season about halfway through, and she went to go see Feyre.
Elaine says, well, she went to visit you. And Feyre's very thrown off by this.
And she goes, her carriage broke down halfway through, and she decided to come back because it was in winter. And so this elicits Feyre to be like, all right, I got to have a conversation with Nesta.
Well, she goes to see Feyre goes to see the cottage, and then she goes and she uses her fortune and she gives it to...
Which I really, this entire scene was only a couple of pages long, but I really loved it, and I thought that it was important. It was kind of a moment's pause where we got to see how Feyre has kind of grown as a person as well.
Generosity was not something that was part of her nature when we first met her.
No.
She was like, I am here to save my family, and that's it.
Which makes total sense.
Of course.
But her going to the poor part of the village and giving little sacks of money or gold and silver to families that needed the most. And then she has this moment where she sees Isaac Hale.
I loved this scene. And I had completely glazed over it, I think, the first time I read it.
Me too. I couldn't remember her seeing Isaac Hale.
Relatable?
Yeah. Because she never loved Isaac. Isaac was an outlet for her. He was an escape for her. And they were both
so young, and she sees that he has grown up and that he has changed. He has been transformed by this during this time that they've all been apart. And so has she. And I think when she looks at him, I think she kind of sees a very muted version of what she and Tamlin were. And she is just happy for them. And she says, like, to my core, I wished them well.
I wish them all of the best. And that made
me
so happy.
The moment that everyone who has an ex Like, that is so...
When you see them happy with somebody else.
And instead of it, like, being a twist or being an ugly feeling, you're just genuinely...
Like, a genuine smile comes to your face. Like, I hope that they're doing just so well.
That's so great.
I loved that scene as well. Mm-hmm. So she makes it back home. She and Nesta, it is time for them to have a conversation.
Finally have this, they have it, and Nesta's actually the one who seeks Feyre out, because Feyre's just out in the garden.
And she says, why are you still here? Oh, by the way, Feyre
has calloused hands. Did you notice that?
I did notice that. From all of her years of hunting.
Was that very attractive to you?
It was different in this context.
I read it and I giggled. I was like, oh!
She asks Feyre, why are you still here?
Why are you here then?
And Feyre says, this is my home. And Nesta goes, it sure as fuck isn't. Your home is somewhere.
She was like, no, it's not. She says, I think your home is somewhere far away.
Far away.
And then she throws a piece of the table at Feyre, the piece with the foxglove on it, which I just have to note quickly. It says that it was the wrong shade of blue. I'm pretty sure foxglove flowers are not blue. I'm actually going to Google it
right now.
Yeah, red, pink, yellow, white, and purple.
So like a bluish purple?
Well, if she painted it blue, then it was incorrect. That's for sure. So I guess maybe that's just, it was blue and that was wrong. Anyways, yeah, so she throws this piece of the table, and she says, your beast's little trick didn't work on me.
Nesta just radiates coldness and calculating energy. She reveals that none of the glamour worked on her. No. She actually went to go find Feyre.
Yeah, when she went to go visit Feyre, she paid a mercenary. She used the last money she had from the pelts, paid the mercenary, made her take her to the wall, couldn't find a way in, and then had to come back. And Feyre is deeply moved by this.
Because she didn't even think that Nesta cared about her.
I was deeply moved by it too.
This entire exchange, I was like wrapped while I was reading it.
Especially that you and I are both eldest daughters.
I have this line, eldest sisters are the backbone of society.
Which we've discussed before, and it remains nonetheless true.
Yes.
But I think it moved me because I know that if one of my brothers had been you just know. Like,
you just do whatever you have to do to protect your family.
That's what you do, because they're your little siblings.
And I have this line, she had cared. Beneath it, she had cared and perhaps loved more fiercely than I could comprehend, more deeply and loyally.
And sibling love is complicated under the best of circumstances. And when you have been through what this family has been through, it's kind of no wonder that Nesta isn't able to show her love or her emotions at all, really, especially not in a healthy way.
Yeah, and she's just made differently. Feyre
she is made differently.
A lot of
she
words
says
like
that. A lot.
She's like, Nesta has always been different than the rest of us. She demands Feyre to tell her everything.
She says, She's like, I know there is no Aunt Ripley. Tell me everything. There's no... I do not believe in Aunt Ripley. And so Feyre does. She tells her everything.
And Nesta, and this is the most Nesta thing ever, rather than exclaim over the story, I can see it happening right now. She listened to the entire thing in silence.
Did not say a
single word. And then, rather than respond to the story, she goes, will you teach me how to paint?
Yeah.
Which I loved. For me, that moment was so special.
To me, it shows that she actually really does know her sister.
Yeah.
Because instead of having to talk about it more or answer questions, I think she knows that the best way for Feyre to have some kind of catharsis, some kind of outlet, is to be able to paint.
And throughout these entire, I guess these 2 or 3 chapters that she's been back at home, Feyre is saying how she couldn't bring it within herself to paint. Mm-mm. She's missing Tamlin.
It's not until Nesta asks her that she gets the brushes and the paints out and decides to get back into it.
I think that maybe this would have been the beginning of her healing journey if she learns about Claire and decides to go back. If she hadn't made that decision, this would have been where her healing journey started.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, and just to not be alone. Right?
Because to share something that you love with someone else.
Because Tamlin forbade her from telling anyone. And for her own safety, he's like, the spies will be everywhere. You cannot tell anyone the truth. And for whatever reason, all it took was Nesta being like, I know you weren't at Aunt Ripley's house. Tell me the truth. I think it was so, so necessary for Feyre to be able to tell somebody how she had been feeling.
And she can't tell Elaine.
And it is so different from the beginning of the this is a hugely significant step in the relationship for Nesta and Feyre. I don't think they've ever
had a conversation like
this.
I think at one point, Elaine's like, maybe you can talk to Nesta, and like she's being so mean to my friends and they hate her. And
I had to say,
like,
I bet if I were around Elaine's friends, they would be uncomfortable around me too, because I would just probably always be like, oh my God.
But I think that Feyre has this funny little internal thought where she's like, I didn't know how to tell her that Nesta and I haven't had a civilized conversation in years.
Which again, like, how freaking out of touch are you, Elaine? Good Lord.
It's very tough. Look,
do you know
for
what?
Elaine.
Do you know what, Isabel? It's almost like she's on a different plane of reality.
Is it?
So the
ball, which you and I love a ball
lovely.
scene.
It would be
but
lovely.
we didn't really get the ball scene
because this is
it
not
isn't
really.
the
It's not.
scene.
First of all, now that we've experienced the summer solstice in
This
Prithian,
is just trash.
a mortal realm ball sounds like a snooze fest. No, thank you.
Feyre battles through the ball
Until she hears
about Claire Bador.
the entire
being
Better
taken.
family. Their home was attacked, burned to the ground. Everybody was killed, but they did not find Claire's body.
Yes.
And Feyre knows immediately. She gets this cold
Feeling.
realization, and she understands that that was supposed to have been her, because that was the name she gave to Rhysand.
And so she makes a decision to go back.
Well, and again, Nesta is standing there watching the look on her face, and she's like, Feyre, what is... And I can't
think
remember.
she
I can't
tells
remember
her
if
to
she
go.
yanks.
She goes...
But does she, like, yank? Do they leave the party? Because there is more...
They do leave the party. And Nesta comes to help Feyre.
Nesta's, like, helping Feyre, like,
pack.
pack, right? And at one point... There's a conversation between Nesta and Feyre about their father.
Who
and
we haven't discussed, by the way.
No, we haven't. And we probably should. But Nesta says to Feyre, our father let our mother die. Mm-hmm. He let her die. And you would go to the ends of the earth to save your High Lord. She says that to her. And I
don't want to
actually
give
think
spoilers, but...
Nesta has a lot of respect for Feyre in this regard. Even if she doesn't
I think
say
Nesta
it
has
outright.
always respected Feyre.
And I think that
she just is incapable of having those conversations.
Right.
For a number of reasons.
And that's really when Feyre decides that Nesta is right. Like, she's not just going to let Tamlin die. She is going to go to the ends of the earth. Even if it costs her everything, she's going to go.
She tells Nesta and Elaine, everything I have told you is a lie. So, like, when this Claire Beta stuff comes out, she's like, all right, listen up.
And she's like, you need to leave. And if you
At
won't
the
leave...
sign of anything amiss.
Yeah.
Anything. You even get a feeling. You leave. And at one point, Nesta looks at her and she goes, we don't need you here, Feyre. Don't look back. And it's not, she's not saying it in a cruel way.
She even references, because that's what Feyre's father said to her when she was taken at the beginning of this book. She says, our father told you once to never come back. And I'm telling you now.
Believe it.
And I'm telling you now, we don't need you. And Feyre realized, without Nesta saying it, Feyre realizes this wasn't a cruelty.
No.
She was telling me,
like releasing her almost.
Yeah, she was setting me free. Like, and it's so funny because when Tamlin sets her free,
it doesn't feel like that.
It feels like an actual prison sentence, right? And so now Nesta setting her free is the real
push that she
for
needed
her.
to make that decision and follow her heart.
Yes. I was afraid rereading that these chapters were going to be tough for me to get through,
but I
actually really loved them.
Me too.
And I savored every moment of it.
Especially knowing what Nesta and Elaine's characters are down the line, which we won't get into, but it was interesting to see the foundations.
Come back for part 2. We'll talk about that more.
So Feyre gets on a horse after being released. Feyre gets on a horse and she battles her way back over days to the Prithian wall.
And then she has to find a way through the wall.
A way through. She finds the hole and she makes it to the spring court. I can only imagine that she's been on the road for a few days at this point.
Yeah.
It looks like the gates, like everything is dead quiet.
Oh, yeah.
It's really
very eerie.
An eerie scene that she arrives to. Everything is dead quiet. You can't hear the sounds of birds chirping or any animals. Like there's no wind. The gates have been bent as if massive hands had wrenched them apart. That was a very arresting image to read about.
It's just very scary. Like it feels very haunted, right?
And then she gets that and she realizes that everyone's gone, and the way that she was yelling out for, and not only just for Tamlin but also for Lucian. I don't know why that made me so emotional. It was like her lover and
because
her friend.
that had become her home.
Yeah,
like Nesta was right. This place had been her home, and they were her new family.
And then that's where the chapter ends.
And she just like kind of sinks to her
I think she
knees,
drops to
doesn't
her
she?
knees, yeah. And she was like, they were all gone.
And she was too late. I think that's what it says. Like, they were gone and I was too late.
I wish that we had briefly discussed her father.
Let's do it.
It was so interesting that we had these moments with both Elaine and with Nesta, and we didn't get that. The only interaction we really have with her father is him examining the like. This actually really gave me the
She
ick.
observes, I think...
She observes that he is happier.
She doesn't have much direct engagement with her father at all. She observes that he is happier. He is counting her money. He's like
investing it for her.
Doing all this stuff. But she does also notice that his limp is improved.
Yeah, because he was able to afford
and that there is
kind of
light
elixir
in his eyes. Well, she says, of course, because some random traveler had come and offered an elixir and a salve.
That's what it was, yeah.
Magically made it better, and she has, like, her heart
she knows
squeezes,
that was
and she says, she's like, even if Tamlin had done nothing else, I would have been indebted to him forever for that.
Her gratitude is very profound.
Yeah.
It just gave me the ick a little bit for her dad. I was
Her
like,
dad
your daughter has been away for how many months? And like,
I
you're
mean,
not like over yourself, like being like, are you safe? Where, I mean, clearly she looks fine.
Well, and she even says, like, when she learns that Nesta went out herself into the forest, and she realizes even if my father hadn't been glamored, he would have at best tried to hire someone else to do it. And my sister, with all of the anger and hatred and rage in her heart, she was the one who found the strength to do it for me. Because Nesta just keeps saying to her, it wasn't right.
Yes.
Oh my God, and we can't go any further.
I know. This exit from, like, her family's presence hit me so much harder this time than in the beginning, at the beginning of this book in chapter 5 or whatever it was.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's supposed to. I think SJM did a really wonderful job of reestablishing those connections and what they mean for Feyre. And so it is harder for us to leave them behind.
And also she has agency this time, where she didn't before.
She's choosing to leave.
Mm-hmm. This is where the next part of our story will begin now. So, do we have anything else to say before we transition over to our spoiler land?
I don't think so.
I think I've got all my main points down, and I think
I have as well.
All right.
Oh wait, no, I have one more.
Okay.
I really liked that Feyre asks Nesta what happened with Thomas Mandry.
Yes.
And she says, I realized he wouldn't have gone with me to rescue you from Prithian.
And that's all she says about it.
I loved that.
I love Nesta. She is so fun to read about.
I love Nesta, and Elaine still irritates me. But I think because we know that SJM doesn't do anything
on purpose. I mean,
or without a purpose.
Yep.
I think even if we don't really, like, see the same kind of, like, edge or strength in Elaine as we get from Nesta, I think Elaine's strength is just different.
Yes, and strength presents itself in many different ways, and we don't know.
Which is important because you and I gravitate towards female characters who are a little grittier, who are a little more edgy, a little. We like a female character with some rage. Mm-hmm. We're big about feminine rage, and we love that. But I think it's important to remember that these softer,
that they are equally as important and don't sometimes in books don't get the moments they deserve.
Yeah.
I just don't think we've had Elaine's moment yet. I know we haven't because I've read everything that SJM has come out with this far.
And on that note, we desperately need to transition into spoiler land because we have lots more to talk about. So thank you for joining us for this part 1 of episode 6. We've had so much fun. Shit's about to get real.
It's going to be interesting to dissect.
And going forward into episodes 7 and 8 and
9. We're going to have 3 more.
Okay.
Shit gets dark.
There's a lot, So all of the fun, happy whimsiness has come to a close.
Gone.
It's going to be pretty action-packed for the rest of the season. So lots to look forward to. Thank you so much for joining us once again on The Greatest Genre.
Yes, and just a quick reminder to follow us on Instagram at _greatest genre, on Twitter at greatest genre. You can email us at thegreatestgenre@gmail.com, and also follow us on TikTok, The Greatest Genre.
Yes, and for those of you who have read everything that SJM has written, we will see you very shortly for part 2 in the spoiler section. Thanks very much.